At Ridgewood High School, mornings always began the same way. The sun would rise over the quiet halls, casting golden streaks through the tall windows as Mr. Elijah Johnson pushed his cleaning cart down the corridors. He was a man of routine, meticulous, dependable, and kind-hearted. Every day he swept, mopped, polished, and tidied without complaint. To the teachers and staff, Elijah was more than just a janitor. He was the backbone of the school, ensuring that everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. Elijah had worked at Ridgewood for nearly 15 years. Over time, he'd become something of an unsung hero. If a teacher needed help fixing a jammed desk drawer or moving heavy boxes, Elijah was there. If a student accidentally spilled lunch in the cafeteria, Elijah cleaned it up with a warm smile, never making them feel embarrassed. His calm demeanor and gentle humor made him easy to talk to, even if some students were too shy to approach him directly. But not everyone treated Elijah with respect. A group of white students led by Jake Thompson, a star football player with a cocky grin, had taken to tormenting him almost daily. It started small, sarcastic comments about how dusty the floors looked despite Elijah's efforts, or jokes about his worn-out shoes. At first, Elijah brushed it off, telling himself they were just kids being silly. But their behavior soon escalated. One morning, Elijah arrived early to clean the gymnasium before classes began. As he wiped down the bleachers, Jake and his friends burst in, laughing loudly. They kicked empty soda cans across the floor, leaving sticky trails of spilled drinks behind them. "Hey, Elijah," Jake called out mockingly. "Guess this is your lucky day. We left you some extra work." His friends erupted into laughter while Elijah stood silently, gripping his mop tighter. He forced a polite nod and continued working, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him upset. The harassment didn't stop there. On another occasion, Elijah found his cleaning supplies scattered throughout the hallway. His brooms were snapped in half and someone had scribbled crude drawings on his cart. Each time, Elijah cleaned up the mess without saying a word. He hoped that ignoring their antics would make them lose interest. Instead, Jake and his crew grew bolder, enlisting other students to join in their cruel games. Despite the growing tension, Elijah remained steadfast in his duties. He believed in doing what was right no matter how difficult the circumstances. Still, the constant mistreatment weighed heavily on him. Some nights, after returning home to his wife Clara, Elijah sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring at his calloused hands. Clara could see the sadness in his eyes but knew better than to push him to quit. "You're stronger than all of them," she reassured him one evening, holding his hand firmly. "Don't let them break you." Little did Elijah, or anyone else, know that karma was already setting its wheels in motion. What seemed like endless torment would soon take a dramatic turn, proving that justice has a way of finding those who deserve it. For now, though, Elijah kept his head down and focused on the task at hand, trusting that brighter days lay ahead. As the days turned into weeks, Jake and his group of friends grew increasingly bold in their treatment of Elijah. What had once been occasional teasing transformed into a relentless campaign of cruelty. The hallways of Ridgewood High became a stage for their antics, with Elijah unwittingly cast as the target of their ridicule. It wasn't enough for them to mock him. They wanted an audience, and they found one. Word spread quickly among the student body about Jake's pranks. Some students laughed along nervously, afraid to stand out if they didn't join in. Others watched silently, uncomfortable but unsure how to intervene. A few even cheered Jake on, feeding his ego and encouraging him to push the boundaries further. His crew expanded, drawing in new members eager to be part of the popular crowd. With each passing day, Elijah felt more isolated, though he never let it show on his face. One afternoon, as Elijah was organizing his cleaning supplies in the utility closet, Jake and 3 of his friends cornered him. They stood in the doorway, blocking his exit, their smirks wide and taunting. "Hey, Elijah," Jake said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You missed a spot in the cafeteria. Thought you'd want to know before someone slips and sues the school." His friends snickered, nudging each other like hyenas circling prey. Elijah simply nodded, keeping his expression neutral. He grabbed his mop and pushed past them without a word, leaving Jake visibly frustrated that he hadn't gotten a reaction. The bullying wasn't limited to verbal jabs anymore. Jake began orchestrating more elaborate schemes designed to humiliate Elijah. One morning, Elijah arrived at work to find his locker, a small rusted cabinet where he kept his lunch and personal belongings, covered in crude graffiti. Racial slurs were scrawled across the metal surface in thick black marker. Elijah froze, staring at the hateful words. For the first time, he felt a flicker of anger burning beneath his calm exterior. But instead of confronting anyone, he quietly fetched some cleaning solution and scrubbed the locker clean, refusing to give Jake the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. Despite the growing hostility, most teachers remained oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to what was happening. Those who did notice often excused Jake's behavior as typical teenage mischief. "Boys will be boys," Mrs. Peterson, the biology teacher, remarked dismissively when another faculty member mentioned the vandalism. Even Principal Harris seemed unwilling to address the issue directly. When Elijah politely brought up the graffiti during a staff meeting, Harris merely shrugged and suggested that Elijah lock his locker next time. The lack of support weighed heavily on Elijah. At home, he tried to hide his frustration from Clara, but she could see the toll it was taking on him. One evening, after a particularly rough day, Elijah finally opened up. Sitting at the kitchen table, he recounted the latest incident. Jake and his friends had stuffed trash into the vents of the school auditorium, causing a foul smell during rehearsals for the spring play. "They're not just targeting me anymore," Elijah said, his voice weary. "They're making life harder for everyone." Clara listened intently, her brow furrowed with concern. "Maybe it's time to say something," she urged gently. "You can't keep letting them walk all over you." Elijah shook his head, insisting that things would blow over eventually. "If I speak up, it'll only make it worse," he said. "I'll handle it my own way." But deep down, Elijah knew he couldn't ignore the situation forever. Each insult, each act of vandalism chipped away at his patience. Something inside him stirred, a quiet resolve to reclaim his dignity. He didn't know yet how he would do it, but he vowed not to let Jake and his gang win. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Elijah, someone else had started paying attention to the chaos unfolding in the halls of Ridgewood High. Someone who was watching and waiting for the right moment to step in. The graffiti on his locker was the final straw for Elijah. He stared at the offensive words scrawled across the metal surface, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched the cleaning spray. For days, he had tried to convince himself that this was just another challenge to endure, another test of his patience. But now, standing in the dim light of the utility room, Elijah felt something shift within him. Enough was enough. That afternoon, after finishing his shift, Elijah decided to take a step he had avoided for far too long. He went to Principal Harris's office. The principal was seated behind his desk, typing away on his computer, looking up only briefly when Elijah knocked and entered. "Mr. Johnson?" Harris said, his tone polite but distant. "What can I do for you?" Elijah explained the situation, calmly, describing the repeated vandalism, the racial slurs, and Jake's escalating behavior. He even showed Harris photos he'd taken of the graffiti before cleaning it off. Harris listened with a furrowed brow, nodding occasionally, but his response was predictable. "I understand your frustration, Elijah," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But without concrete evidence pointing to specific students, there's not much we can do. Kids will be kids." Elijah felt a wave of disappointment wash over him. He had hoped, perhaps naively, that Harris would take action, that someone in authority would finally stand up for him. Instead, he left the office feeling more alone than ever. On the walk home, his mind raced. Should he quit? Could he really continue working in an environment where he was treated so poorly, with no support from those who were supposed to protect him? When Elijah arrived home, Clara could see the weight of the day etched on his face. Over dinner, he recounted the meeting with Harris, his voice tinged with bitterness. "He didn't even try," Elijah said, shaking his head. It's like they don't care what happens to me. Clara reached across the table and placed a reassuring hand on his. Then maybe it's time to make them care, she said firmly. You've been quiet for too long, Elijah. Sometimes people need to see the truth before they'll act. Her words lingered in Elijah's mind long after the meal ended. That night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, he replayed her advice over and over. Make them care. It wasn't in Elijah's nature to cause trouble or seek revenge, but he realized that staying silent wasn't helping anyone. Not himself, not the school, and certainly not the students who deserved better role models than Jake and his crew. Slowly, a plan began to form in his mind. If no one else would hold these bullies accountable, then he would find a way to do it himself. The next morning, Elijah arrived at work earlier than usual. As he cleaned the hallways, he kept an eye out for anything unusual, anything that might serve as proof of Jake's behavior. He also started paying closer attention to the dynamics among the students. To his surprise, he noticed that not everyone laughed along with Jake's antics. Some students looked uncomfortable, glancing away guiltily when Elijah passed by. One name in particular caught his attention: Sarah Miller, a shy sophomore who often sat alone during lunch. She seemed different from the others, quieter, more observant. Elijah made a mental note to keep an eye on her. Later that week, while mopping near the cafeteria, Elijah overheard a snippet of conversation between two students. They mentioned Sarah, saying she'd been taking pictures of Jake and his friends. At first, Elijah dismissed it as idle gossip, but the thought stuck with him. Could Sarah have evidence of the bullying? And if she did, would she be willing to share it? Determined to find out, Elijah approached Sarah the following day. She was sitting on a bench outside the school, scrolling through her phone. When Elijah greeted her, she looked up nervously, clearly unsure why the janitor was speaking to her. Sarah, Elijah began gently, I heard you've been watching what's going on around here. I wanted to thank you for caring. Sarah hesitated, her fingers tightening around her phone. After a moment, she nodded slowly. I don't think what they're doing is right, she admitted quietly. But I'm scared of what'll happen if I say something. Elijah understood her fear all too well. He knelt down beside her, his voice steady and kind. You don't have to face them alone, he said. If you're willing to help, I promise we'll figure this out together. Sarah looked into his eyes, searching for reassurance. What she found there, a quiet strength and unwavering determination, gave her the courage to nod again. Together they began to hatch a plan, one that would shine a light on the truth and force the school to confront the ugliness hiding in its halls. Little did they know, their actions would set off a chain reaction neither of them could have anticipated. The next day, Sarah arrived at school carrying a small sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. For so long she had been a silent observer, blending into the background as chaos unfolded around her. But now, with Elijah's quiet encouragement, she felt a flicker of hope, a chance to make things right. She slipped her phone into her bag, determined to gather more evidence of Jake and his friends' cruel behavior. It didn't take long for an opportunity to present itself. During lunch, Sarah noticed Jake and his crew lounging near the lockers, laughing loudly as they tossed crumpled paper cups toward Elijah's cleaning cart. One of them deliberately knocked over the trash can Elijah had just emptied, scattering wrappers and half-eaten snacks across the floor. Jake smirked, leaning against the wall as if he owned the place. Hey, Elijah, he called out mockingly. Looks like you've got more work to do. Sarah's heart pounded as she pulled out her phone and began recording. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself, reminding herself why she was doing this. As the video captured Jake's smug expression and the scattered mess, Sarah zoomed in on Elijah, who calmly bent down to clean up the debris without a word of protest. The contrast between their attitudes, their cruelty versus his quiet dignity, was striking. Over the next few days, Sarah continued documenting everything. She filmed Jake and his friends vandalizing Elijah's cart, leaving racial slurs written in marker on the walls of the bathroom, and even dumping soda bottles behind the bleachers during gym class. Each clip added another layer to the story she was building. By the end of the week, Sarah had amassed a collection of videos that painted a damning picture of Jake's actions. When she finally showed the footage to Elijah, his reaction was a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You've done all this for me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah nodded shyly, avoiding his gaze. "I couldn't just sit back and watch anymore," she admitted. "You deserve better than how they've been treating you." Elijah studied the videos carefully, his mind racing with possibilities. Together, they decided it was time to take action. But they needed a strategy. Posting the videos online or sharing them directly with the school administration felt risky. Jake and his friends could easily deny their involvement or retaliate against Sarah. Instead, Elijah suggested sending the footage anonymously to someone outside the school system, someone who couldn't be swayed by Principal Harris or the football team's influence. They chose the local news station, known for its investigative reporting on community issues. That evening, Sarah uploaded the videos to a secure email account and drafted a message explaining what she had witnessed. She signed off simply as a concerned student, attaching the hashtag #RespectElijah to draw attention to Elijah's plight. With Elijah standing beside her offering quiet support, Sarah hit send. As soon as the email was sent, a wave of nervous excitement washed over both of them. What would happen next? Would anyone believe them? Or would the story disappear into the void, ignored like so many other cries for help? Despite their uncertainty, Elijah placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "we did the right thing. Sometimes that's all that matters." Little did they know, their anonymous tip would ignite a firestorm. Within hours, the news station picked up the story, airing segments about the bullying at Ridgewood High. Social media exploded with outrage as people shared screenshots of the videos and demanded accountability. Parents, alumni, and community members flooded the school board with calls and emails, insisting that justice be served. For Sarah, watching the impact of her bravery unfold was both exhilarating and terrifying. She knew that Jake and his friends wouldn't go down without a fight, but she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. With Elijah by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. And as the truth spread like wildfire, it became clear that karma had finally caught up with those who thought they were untouchable. The fallout from Sarah's anonymous email hit Ridgewood High like a storm. By the next morning, screenshots of the videos were everywhere, shared on social media, discussed in local news segments, and even printed in the community newspaper. The hashtag #SoccerRespectElijah trended online, drawing attention not just locally but across the state. Parents, teachers, alumni, and strangers alike voiced their outrage, demanding answers about how such cruelty could go unchecked in a school meant to nurture young minds. Principal Harris walked into the building that day feeling the weight of dozens of angry phone calls. His inbox was flooded with emails from furious parents questioning why nothing had been done to stop Jake and his friends. Even the superintendent called an emergency meeting, warning Harris that the district's reputation was at stake. For the first time, Harris realized the gravity of the situation and his role in allowing it to spiral out of control. That afternoon, he called an impromptu assembly in the gymnasium, summoning all students and faculty to attend. The room buzzed, with nervous energy as everyone filed in, unsure what to expect. Jake sat near the front with his usual cocky grin, flanked by his crew. They exchanged smug looks, convinced this was just another routine lecture about school spirit or attendance policies. But when Principal Harris stepped up to the microphone, his tone was unusually grave. "Over the past few days," Harris began, "many of you have likely seen reports about unacceptable behavior occurring within our school." He paused, glancing around the room. "These actions are not only hurtful but also damaging to the values we strive to uphold here at Ridgewood High." As he spoke, a large screen behind him flickered to life, displaying one of the videos Sarah had captured. Gasps rippled through the crowd as students watched Jake mocking Elijah and deliberately creating messes for him to clean. Jake's grin faltered as he recognized himself on the screen. His friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering frantically among themselves. Harris continued, his voice firm. We cannot ignore these incidents any longer. Those responsible will be held accountable. Just as Jake started to protest, standing up and shaking his head defiantly, a voice rang out from the back of the gym. "It's true!" Everyone turned to see Sarah Miller walking toward the stage, her face pale but determined. She stopped at the edge of the crowd, holding her phone aloft. "I recorded everything," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I saw what you did, Jake. All of you. You can't deny it." A stunned silence fell over the room. Jake's bravado crumbled as he stared at Sarah, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. His friends looked away, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The other students murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement, others looking ashamed for having laughed along with Jake's pranks. Elijah, seated quietly near the back, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of relief and apprehension. He hadn't expected Sarah to reveal herself so publicly, but her courage filled him with pride. When Principal Harris asked Sarah to come forward and explain further, she hesitated for only a moment before stepping onto the stage. With Elijah's steady gaze encouraging her from the audience, she recounted everything she had witnessed: the vandalism, the racial slurs, the deliberate attempts to humiliate Elijah. As Sarah spoke, the atmosphere in the gym shifted. Students who had once cheered Jake on now looked at him with disgust. Teachers exchanged knowing glances, realizing they should have intervened sooner. Even Jake's parents, sitting awkwardly in the bleachers, seemed to shrink in their seats, their faces reddening with embarrassment. By the time Sarah finished speaking, there was no denying the truth. Karma had arrived at Ridgewood High, and it wasn't going anywhere until justice was served. The gymnasium was eerily silent as Sarah stepped off the stage, her hands trembling but her head held high. Every eye in the room followed her, some filled with admiration, others clouded with guilt or disbelief. Jake stood frozen near the front row, his usual confidence shattered. For the first time he looked small, like a boy who had been caught red-handed instead of the untouchable football star everyone feared to cross. Principal Harris wasted no time addressing the elephant in the room. "Jake Thompson," he called, out sternly, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "Please come forward." Jake hesitated, glancing nervously at his friends who avoided making eye contact. When he finally shuffled toward the stage, his steps were slow and reluctant, each one heavier than the last. As he reached the microphone, Harris gestured for him to speak. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Jake's mouth opened, but no words came out. He glanced around the room, searching for support, but found none. The sea of faces staring back at him ranged from indifferent to outright hostile. Finally, he stammered, "It wasn't me. I mean, it wasn't just me. Everyone does stuff like this. It's not that big a deal." His voice cracked under the weight of his own defensiveness. His words only made things worse. A chorus of disapproving murmurs rippled through the crowd. One teacher, Mrs. Alvarez, stood up abruptly. "That is absolutely untrue, Jake," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "What you've done goes far beyond harmless pranks. You've targeted Mr. Johnson because of who he is, and that is unacceptable." Jake's face turned bright red as more teachers chimed in, recounting instances where they'd witnessed, or ignored, his behavior. Even his fellow students began speaking up. A junior named Marcus, who had once laughed along with Jake's antics, admitted, "We all knew what was happening. We should have said something sooner." Each confession added another layer of accountability, leaving Jake increasingly isolated. But the most powerful moment came when Elijah himself stood up. Slowly rising from his seat, he walked to the front of the gym, his movements deliberate and calm. The entire room fell silent as he approached Jake, standing just a few feet away. Without raising his voice, Elijah spoke directly to him. "I never wanted any of this," he said, his tone measured but firm. "All I ever did was my job, trying to make this school a better place for everyone. But you chose to make my life harder day after day. Why?" Jake stared at the floor, unable to meet Elijah's gaze. Tears welled up in his eyes, though whether from shame or frustration was unclear. After a long pause, he muttered, "I don't know." I thought it was funny at first, and then I don't know why I kept going. Elijah nodded slowly, as if accepting the answer without judgment. Then he turned to address the rest of the students. This isn't about punishing Jake, he said. It's about learning from this, about treating people with respect no matter who they are or what they do. If we can start doing that, maybe something good can come out of all this. His words resonated deeply, earning applause from both students and faculty. Principal Harris announced immediate consequences. Jake and his core group would be suspended for 2 weeks, banned from participating in sports or extracurricular activities for the remainder of the semester, and required to attend mandatory counseling sessions. On empathy and diversity, their parents were summoned to the school, where they sat grim-faced during a private meeting with Harris and the superintendent. As the assembly drew to a close, the mood in the gym shifted. Students lingered, talking quietly among themselves about what they had witnessed. Some approached Elijah to apologize personally, while others thanked Sarah for having the courage to speak up. For the first time in months, Elijah felt a sense of peace, a quiet assurance that change was possible, even in the unlikeliest of places. Outside the school, reporters waited eagerly for statements, eager to document the unfolding drama. Inside, however, the real transformation was already beginning, not in headlines but in hearts. In the days following the explosive assembly, Ridgewood High underwent a transformation that no one could have predicted. The suspensions of Jake and his friends sent shockwaves through the student body, forcing everyone to reevaluate their actions, or lack thereof. What had once been dismissed as harmless teasing was now seen for what it truly was: bullying rooted in prejudice and disrespect. The school's hallways, usually buzzing with chatter, grew quieter as students became more mindful of how they treated one another. Principal Harris, feeling the pressure from parents and the community, took decisive steps to ensure such behavior wouldn't happen again. He implemented mandatory anti-bullying workshops for all students, led by outside experts who specialized in fostering inclusivity and empathy. Teachers were required to attend training sessions on recognizing and addressing discriminatory behavior. Posters promoting kindness and respect appeared on every bulletin board, accompanied by quotes encouraging unity and understanding. Even the football team, once untouchable, faced stricter supervision and accountability measures. For Jake and his crew, life at Ridgewood became unbearable, at least initially. Their suspension meant missing not only classes, but also key games and social events. When they returned to school, they were met with icy stares from classmates who either blamed them for the negative attention or simply didn't want to be associated with troublemakers. Some students openly avoided sitting near them in class or eating lunch at the same table. For Jake, whose identity had always been tied to his popularity, this isolation hit hard. His grades began slipping, and his once confident demeanor faded into quiet resentment. Meanwhile, Elijah found himself at the center of an unexpected wave of support. Students who had previously ignored him now greeted him warmly in the halls, often stopping to thank him for standing up against injustice. Teachers made a point to acknowledge his contributions during staff meetings, praising his resilience and professionalism. Even Principal Harris personally apologized to Elijah, promising to prioritize creating a safer environment for everyone. "You've taught us all an important lesson," Harris said sincerely during one conversation, "and I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner." Sarah, too, gained newfound respect from her peers. Though she still preferred staying out of the spotlight, many students approached her to commend her bravery. A group of seniors even invited her to join their leadership club, saying her courage inspired them to speak up about issues they cared about. For the first time, Sarah felt like she belonged somewhere, a feeling she hadn't experienced since starting high school. As part of the school's efforts to rebuild trust, a new initiative called Respect Week was introduced. Students organized activities aimed at celebrating diversity and promoting kindness, including art displays, poetry readings, and panel discussions featuring alumni who had overcome adversity. Elijah was asked to give a short speech during the kickoff event, which he accepted graciously. Standing before a packed auditorium, he shared his story, not just of the bullying, but also of hope and perseverance. Change starts with each of us, he said, his voice steady and heartfelt. If we choose to lift each other up instead of tearing each other down, there's nothing we can't accomplish. The impact of these changes rippled beyond Ridgewood's walls. Local news outlets covered the school's progress, highlighting its commitment to becoming a model for inclusivity. Parents expressed pride in seeing their children take responsibility for their actions, while community leaders praised the administration for finally stepping up. Even Jake's parents, though humiliated by the public scrutiny, began attending family counseling sessions, determined to guide their son toward better choices. By the end of the semester, Ridgewood High felt like a different place. The air was lighter, the tension that had lingered for so long replaced by a sense of possibility. While scars remained, both visible and invisible, the seeds of healing had been planted. And though the journey ahead wouldn't always be easy, one thing was clear. Justice had arrived, setting the stage for a brighter future. Months passed and Ridgewood High continued to evolve in ways no one could have imagined. The changes weren't just superficial, they were deeply rooted, like new shoots breaking through cracked soil after a long winter. Elijah remained the steady presence he had always been, but now his role extended beyond cleaning the school. He became a mentor of sorts, offering quiet advice to students who sought him out during their lunch breaks or after class. Some came to talk about personal struggles. Others simply wanted to share stories or express gratitude for how he'd inspired them. Jake, on the other hand, faced a much harder road to redemption. His suspension ended, but his reputation was irreparably damaged. No longer welcomed into the inner circles of popularity, he spent most of his time alone, grappling with the consequences of his actions. At first, he tried to brush it off, pretending nothing bothered him. But late at night, lying awake in bed, he replayed Sarah's words and Elijah's calm demeanor over and over in his mind. Slowly, guilt began to chip away at his defenses. One day, Jake approached Elijah outside the gymnasium. Elijah was organizing his cleaning supplies when he noticed Jake standing awkwardly nearby, shuffling his feet. "Mr. Johnson," Jake began, hesitantly, Can I say something?" Elijah nodded, setting down his mop. "I'm sorry," Jake blurted out, his voice cracking slightly. "For everything. I didn't realize how bad it was until all this happened." He looked down, unable to meet Elijah's eyes. After a moment of silence, Elijah replied gently, "Apologies are important, Jake, but what matters more is what you do next." Those words stuck with Jake. Determined to prove he wasn't the person everyone thought he was, he started volunteering at a local community center on weekends, helping organize events for underprivileged kids. It wasn't glamorous work, but it gave him a sense of purpose and a chance to make amends without seeking recognition. Over time, some students noticed the change in him, even if they still kept their distance. For Jake, it was enough to know he was trying. Sarah blossomed in unexpected ways as well. Her courage had opened doors she never imagined possible. She joined the school newspaper, writing articles that shed light on issues affecting marginalized students. Her pieces earned praise from teachers and peers alike, and soon she found herself leading discussions about equity and inclusion. What started as a moment of bravery turned into a lifelong passion for advocacy. Even Elijah marveled at her growth, often telling Clara how proud he was of the young woman she'd become. As for Ridgewood itself, the transformation was undeniable. The hallways buzzed with conversations, not gossip or cruelty, but meaningful exchanges between students who once avoided each other. New friendships formed across racial, cultural, and social lines, proving that connection could thrive where division once existed. Teachers reported fewer disciplinary issues and a noticeable improvement in overall morale. Parents praised the school for fostering an environment where every child felt valued. On the last day of the school year, Elijah stood in the empty auditorium, sweeping up stray bits of confetti left behind from the senior send-off celebration. As he worked, Sarah walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need a break," she said with a smile, handing him one. They sat together on the edge of the stage, sipping quietly as sunlight streamed through the windows. "You know," Sarah said after a while. I used to think this place would never change, that people like Jake would always win because they didn't care about anyone else. But now, she paused, glancing around the room. Now I feel like maybe we're building something better here. Elijah nodded, his expression thoughtful. Change takes time, Sarah, and it doesn't happen unless good people stand up and fight for it. You did that. All of us did. He smiled warmly at her before adding, but remember, the work isn't done yet. There will always be challenges ahead. What matters is that we keep moving forward. As they finished their coffee and prepared to leave, Elijah took one last look at the auditorium. The space felt different now, cleaner, brighter, full of promise. Outside, students laughed and hugged goodbye, already looking forward to summer adventures. In that moment, Elijah knew justice had struck back quickly, yes, but its true power lay in the lasting impact it created. Karma had done its job, but compassion had taken the lead, and that, Elijah thought as he locked up for the evening, was worth every struggle.